You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks and Zach Bechtold. We hope you enjoy this week's show, and you can find out more about us by going online at beardedtheologians.com, where you can pick up a few t-shirts, listen to a few old episodes, and find ways that you can connect with us. Thank you for listening. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week on the podcast, we were, starting our process, and we always kind of start with what are we going to talk about today. And when we don't have anything off the top of our head, we always go to the lectionary. And
we never have anything off the top of our head.
Not this week, not with all the things that we've had been going on with all the funerals that we've had. I think we'll have between both of us from now until Saturday, that'll be like 5 funerals between both of us. So yeah, I'm a little busy this week, but we landed on Galatians 5, and it's an interesting breakup this week. It's Galatians 5:1, and then 13 through 25. We're actually going to work Galatians 1, or 5:1, and then Galatians 5, 13 through 15. So, Zach, you want to read those for us?
Yeah. If you want to go and read 2 through 12, encourage you to, but it's certainly Paul talking about the law of circumcision and the relationship that people have with the law and that kind of thing, and that tension between the old law and what Jesus does, and how do we free ourselves from that. But context as we skip over that for those reasons. Here we go. Galatians 5:1, 13 through 15. Christ has set us free for freedom. Therefore, stand firm and don't submit to bondage of slavery again. Verse 13, you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters, and don't let this freedom be an opportunity to indulge your selfish impulses, but serve each other through love. All the law has been fulfilled in a single statement. Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour each other, be careful that you don't get eaten up by each other. And so, Matt, as you hear Paul writing in Galatians here, what comes to mind?
You know, when we were talking, as we were working through this, the word freedom kind of like, I don't know, perked up on for me. And so as we were kind of getting ready, I was shuffling through the different translations to see what the word is, and like all things, not all translations agree on what that word is for freedom. Actually, one of the ones I found interesting was the King James, where it said liberty. And as I think about the freedom and liberty, and like in the times that we're in, and then the day, like, you know, we're coming up on Independence Day as well. I think if I were preaching this today, I think wrestling with what is freedom. And I love how the precepts of love your neighbor, the 2 precepts are love your neighbor and be guided by the Spirit, like that. Those are the precepts that are the study notes in the Common English Wesley Studying Bible say, like, that those are 2 precepts to be able to have freedom. And what does that look like for us as followers of Jesus? Like, I think when we talk about freedom in Jesus, it's not the freedom that we think of when we hear the word freedom, you know, like that, you know, that just like freedom, whatever. I think being freedom within following Jesus is not being bound by all the laws of Judaism, but being free in Christ to love our neighbor. And I say that because, like, in Judaism, the practice was not necessarily like you couldn't love your neighbor. Like, if they were not of the faith, you didn't interact with them.
Right.
And so this freedom in Christ allows you to actually get to know your neighbor, because you don't have to worry about some of those food practices and things like that. Now, I will say some of those food practices are good general, like, ways of handling food and that sort of stuff. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But I also like pork and, bully barbecue all day long. But I think that when we think of freedom, especially in this day and age, I think it's a good word to wrestle with. And if I were preaching this week, I think I would probably wrestle with it. in my sermon and try to wrestle with what does that mean for us today.
Yeah. I mean, I'm right there with you. I intentionally take July 4th weekend off, and I'm
Yeah,
out
you
of the
do.
pulpit for all kinds of reasons. Most of it family reasons, um, and so I don't have to wrestle with this on that Sunday, but it makes it. We were talking before we hit record, and I wonder, Peter and Paul have kind of a strenuous relationship, especially in regards to the law and Jesus and the tensions that are held there. And I wonder if Paul is speaking, because often Paul and Peter will speak to each other in their letters and take jabs at one another. And I wonder if this is a place of like Paul being like, Peter's out here doing the things and still trying to live into the law and also follow Jesus, and he's just missing the point, right? If he really wants to be free, if you all really want to be free, um, it's not the law that gives us freedom. It's living out who Christ has called us to be and why Christ was here and what Christ taught us in loving our neighbor. That's what sets us free. That's what gives us freedom. And it gives us freedom from the law, right? You can see Paul pointing back to the Hebrew law, which Paul is a good Jew, right? Like he lived into it for his lifetime. And but he's pointing to it saying it's been misused, right? It's been the law has been a tool to oppress and hold people back and keep us from community because like you said, Matt, it held us from getting to know our neighbor if your neighbor wasn't Jewish, right? And he's pointing to the more of here's what Christ came to do, and the freedom in that is from this. It's from the law, and it's living into who and what Christ has called us to be in that love. And it goes on. Matt, you mentioned that it continues on through the end of the chapter. Paul goes right into the fruits of the Spirit. And here's how you do that. Here's
Mm-hmm.
how you live out this new thing that Christ taught us, right? Um, and so I find it really interesting, especially in the light of patriotic holidays. Um, when we talk about freedom from the pulpit, what does that really mean? What are we pushing back on? What are we leaning into? Or are we pushing into, we're the greatest free country in the world? Or are we willing to say, no, here's what freedom looks like? And Christ gives us that freedom in love. And are we living that out in our context?
Well, it's funny. There are two things that came to mind as you were talking. The first is you're talking about the jabs in the letter and all
Mhm.
that stuff. What came into my head was the new Jack White song, Archbishop Harold Holmes, where he literally starts out, dear friends, if you want to feel better, don't let the devil make you toss this letter. I really
Mhm.
feel like that's coming from Paul to,
Sure.
to people of Galatia. But I also think too that when we talk about freedom, that word is going to hit differently for people in our congregation,
Oh, absolutely.
and people have experienced that in different ways or understand that in different ways. And so
Hmm.
I think unpacking it would allow us, like, what does that mean? What does it look like? Like, you would have to do a really, you could definitely do some really good word study work here
Hmm.
to really fill that out to understand that freedom is like, especially when we talk about being free in Christ, it's the liberation of all of us.
Right.
It's like we can't, and I always love that term that we can't all be free, or we can't be free until all of us are free.
Right.
And like I just think that as we process that, like what does that look like? How can we bring freedom
Hmm.
to those around us? How and I really like, to me it's about love. Like it's how we care for our neighbors, how we care for
Well,
those that we come in contact with.
right. Well, and it is. I mean, that's verse 14. All the law has been fulfilled in a single statement. Love your neighbor. But Paul goes on, if you're not going to, if you don't love your neighbor, if you bite and devour each other, that's what you're going to do. Be careful. You can't say you love your neighbor out of one side of your mouth and then
I just love how he
speak out of
writes
the other
that
side,
though.
right?
He's like, but
Yeah.
if you bite and devour each
Yeah.
other, be careful that you don't get eaten up by each other.
Right.
I just,
Like he lays it out there of look, this is it. Love your neighbor. And if you're not going to do that, here's what's going to happen.
yeah,
You're going to fight. You're going to eat each other up. You're going to tear each other down. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's what's going to happen. Um, I was talking to another pastor friend this week, and they're in a part of the world where ICE raids are pretty significant, and they were at a community meeting on how do we as a church help and be present in that. And he made a comment that I thought was really profound in working with his church and talking about, well, we can't out of one side of our mouth lift up a group of people while tearing another down and dehumanizing them. Are the folks doing ICE raids doing bad things? Absolutely. But to dehumanize them while lifting another up isn't helping, right? Like we have to find ways to stop the harm and the hate while protecting the people that are in harm. And remembering that everybody in this position's human. So how do we lead this exact thing right here? Love your neighbor on one end, right? Offering protection and guidance and hope, but dehumanizing on the other end, we're just eating each other up, right? We have to be careful.
I love how so the voice we've talked about using this before, and you and I've used
Oh,
it in our
I thought you
in
were talking
different
about the TV show.
no no
Um,
no no.
it's like
I
I've
don't think
never
they've
seen
talked
it.
about this on that show. Of course, I don't ever, I've never seen that show,
I've
so I don't
never
know.
seen it.
But on the in the voice translation, it has this interesting. Why all this vicious gnawing on each other? If you are not
Yeah,
careful, you will find you've eaten each other alive.
right.
And I think that's one thing I have wrestled with as
Hmm.
we're in this space of division that we live in our world that we've allowed because we've just
Yeah.
I believe some of it has to do with like not wanting to let go of power. And so how do you
Oh,
let not
100%.
let go of power? You make the other side look weaker. And so then
Right.
you tear them like I have a whole that's a
It's
whole
it's the dehumanizing thing,
yeah.
right? Like if we don't see
Um
them as human,
and
here we
so we
go.
started doing that, and that's really where it's led us to this point. And
Right.
so I think in order for us to be free, we must look at all and discern how can we care for everyone and
Hmm.
where people are in their spaces in their life. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, think about it. If freedom is loving your neighbor and you don't you harbor hate or anger or anything, right? If you harbor that against another person, are you free? Or is that holding your heart, mind, and soul hostage from freedom? And yeah, I mean, true freedom is that, right? Having being able to move towards that, move towards the liberation of love, move towards the being in community with all people and bringing healing and hope in really, really desperate and hard times, right? I don't, I've thought this all along, like this is not a new revelation for me. The commandment to love your neighbor, it's a commandment because it's not easy, right? Like
right.
it's hard. And Jesus talks about it so much because it is hard. Um, and I think if it was an easy thing for us to do, Jesus wouldn't have had to mention it, right? Wouldn't have had to harp on it all the time, wouldn't have had to teach on it. Paul wouldn't still be teaching on it, right? Um, and so I think that's the significant thing there. If we're looking for freedom, it's not in the law. It's not in the rules and regulations and the power structures. It's in the liberation that love brings.
So you're saying love will set us free.
Damn. If I was a musician, I'd play a song right now, but I'm not.
I think that's a good place to land.
Despite the guitars that are
But the
behind
guitars
me,
behind you.
despite all the musical
You
instruments behind me.
notice you notice in this appointment, I don't have my guitars in my office now.
I have noticed that.
Well, Emily took them, so that's where they are. She's wanting to learn. Um, Zach, where have you seen God at work in your life since the last time we're on the show?
Um, Geez, in a few places. You mentioned earlier we have between us we have a handful of funerals, and there I won't go into detail for respect to families and whatnot, but there in a lot of ways, um,
Oh no,
and
you you broke.
Oh, my internet connection is unstable. Is that better?
Okay.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. Yeah, to be able to be in that space and help families just heal and bring some hope to really, really sad situations and heartbreaking situations. What about you, Matt?
Kind of in the same vein. I had received a call on Tuesday that they had found this funeral home like literally an hour north of us. It was without a pastor, and they reached out. They were part of the funeral home was part of this, corporate funeral home system. So they did what anybody would do in a system. They reached out to the other funeral home in my community and said, "Do you have anybody?" And they recommended me. And um, when I was standing with the funeral home director yesterday, I told them like, "Hey, if you ever need someone who does not have a pastor for a funeral, I'm your guy. I want to be in that space for people because I feel like that should be a space that nobody has. Nobody should go without in that space, and that's just part of my. It's definitely been more of my call in these last few years to be in that space for people because I've started recognizing that there are people who move to communities that don't necessarily have a pastor or a church family home to be able to do that. And I know that our people here, if I came to our people and said, "Hey, we're going to do a funeral in a couple of days," like I know that they'd step up. But I also know that it's part of how they share love, as we were talking about earlier, how we want to set people free. And to me, that just it warms my heart knowing that people believe it, that I can do this. Like it makes me feel good. And then it just was it was one of those spaces like, just being in that space definitely makes us feel the sweet, sweet spirit that just, it's one of those things that, we enjoy getting to be in that presence of God in that space. So we want to thank our listeners for listening. We have a lot of amazing content. I was looking at something the other day. I was looking for something the other day and stumbled upon something. Literally, I was Google searching something the other day and it recommended the podcast for something, which was kind of weird
Nice.
to be in that space. But we're definitely grateful for our listeners. Don't be afraid to like and share our stuff on your pages and things. And also, you can also buy some gear to promote the show and all those good things. So for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Guys, and like this video. And push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.